A single shot echoed across the mountains, and by the time the sound died, 3 lives were already tied together by fate. A soldier haunted by war, a child with a secret scar, and a loyal dog who carried the truth no one else dared to see. What they found in the snow wasn't mercy, it was revelation. Stay with this story until the last breath. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because the final twist will remind you that even the cold remembers. A blizzard swept through the mountains of Clearwater, Montana, coating the valley in relentless white and swallowing all sound. Beneath that sky of moving ice, a small figure trudged forward against the storm. A 6-year-old black girl named Lila Turner. Her cheeks raw from the cold, her right leg ending in a polished steel prosthetic that glinted through snow. Each step was a struggle, the metal crutches biting into the ice, but her spirit refused to yield. Beside her walked Scout, a strong German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat matted by frost. His body leaned into the wind, guiding her, as if he alone could see through the storm. They had been walking for nearly an hour, following a trail that had almost vanished under new snow. Their destination uncertain, but Lila's heart knew where it was leading, to Caleb Ross. Caleb was a black veteran who lived alone beyond the ridge, a man shaped by war and solitude. He had saved Lila 3 years ago when a drunk driver left her mother's car upside down in a ditch of fire and glass. She had been 5 then, crying for help in a voice too small for the night to hear, until Caleb's arms pulled her out. Since that day, she had followed him like a shadow, visiting the cabin, learning how to repair fences, to light a stove, to listen to the forest. He wasn't her father, but in her heart, he was something more. She called him Mr. Caleb, and he called her Little Brave. He once told her that pain wasn't meant to break people, it was meant to remind them they were still alive. Those words had stayed with her, echoing now in the howling wind. Lila adjusted the small scarf around her neck, feeling the weight of the cold metal pendant beneath it, a dog tag, dull with age. Caleb had given it to her a year ago, saying it belonged to his fallen friend Marcus Gray, a fellow soldier who died shielding him during an ambush in Kandahar. "Keep it close," Little Brave Caleb had said that night. "When I can't be there, that tag will remember you for me." She had worn it ever since. Now as she climbed through the drifts, she pressed the tag between her gloved palms and whispered, "Please let him still be here." Her voice vanished into the wind. For 2 days, she hadn't seen Caleb. He was supposed to return from town with supplies and medicine for Scout's paw, but he never came back. When the snowstorm began, most people in Clearwater locked their doors. Lila instead packed a small bag and left the cabin before dawn. "You saved me once," she said to the photo of her and Caleb she kept under her pillow, "so I'll come save you." She didn't tell anyone. She knew no one else would go looking for a solitary black veteran lost in the storm. She had seen how townspeople stared at him, the old scars on his arms, the quiet dignity that made them uneasy. But she also knew what they didn't. Caleb's silence wasn't anger, it was survival. He had fought wars both overseas and at home. He had endured the battlefield and the prejudice that followed him back. Lila had once overheard him muttering near the fire, "Sometimes, Little Brave, the world ain't warm enough for people like us, so we learn to build our own heat." Now she was walking straight into the cold to find him. Scout barked once, cutting through the white blur. Lila looked up. The ridge ahead shimmered with smoke, faint but unmistakable. Her heart skipped. "You smell it too, boy," she whispered. Scout barked again and ears pricked. He started forward, paws crunching hard snow, his tail stiff with alertness. Lila's breath came quicker as she followed her crutches, clanging softly against the ice. Every few steps she stumbled, catching herself before falling. Her leg throbbed from the cold, but she kept pushing, whispering Caleb's name with each breath. The closer they got, the darker the sky became, not from clouds, but from smoke curling against the wind. She reached the ridge and froze. Below her, the valley glowed red and black. A truck burned at the base of the slope, flames twisting through the snow like orange serpents. The metal hissed steam rising where heat met ice. For a second, she thought it was a nightmare, but then she saw movement through the cracked windshield. Someone was inside. Her stomach turned to ice. "Mr. Caleb," she screamed, but the wind shredded her cry. Without hesitation, she slid down the slope crutches, digging deep as she half crawled, half fell through the powder. Scout followed, barking furiously. The smell of gasoline was sharp, choking. Lila reached the truck and saw the horror. Fully, the front seat engulfed glass, shattered the rear cabin glowing red. In the truck bed, two figures lay motionless, one broad-shouldered, wearing a torn jacket she recognized instantly. Caleb. The other man's police uniform was half burned. Officer Ryan Cole, the young deputy who often brought mail up the mountain. Both were tied at the wrists and ankles, duct tape covering their mouths. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "No," she gasped. She struck the side of the truck with her crutch again and again. "Wake up, please," the wind answered with a hollow roar. Scout jumped onto the tailgate, claws screeching against metal, his teeth digging into the ropes around Caleb's wrists. Sparks blew over them, the air thick with heat. Lila pressed her back against the truck, tears freezing on her cheeks. The snow was melting beneath the flames, creating black puddles that reflected the firelight. Caleb's head sagged forward, his hands jerking weakly as he tried to free himself, while Officer Ryan Cole lay beside him, his uniform sleeve on fire. Lila swung her crutch against the side of the truck, with all her strength, screaming his name, her voice breaking through the storm. "Mr. Caleb, wake up! It's me!" Her breath came out in bursts of smoke, half from the cold, half from the fumes. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Caleb's eyes opened, dazed and clouded, but the moment he saw her small figure through the haze, something in him snapped awake. The soldier inside him remembered what to do. His wrists strained against the rope, twisting until the skin split. He tried to reach Scout, who was snarling and pulling at the bindings until his gums bled. The rope refused to give at first, but then one strand broke and Caleb's hand shot free. He ripped the duct tape from his mouth, gasping for breath so sharp it cut his throat, and shouted hoarsely through the smoke, "Get down, Lila!" His warning came too late. The fuel line beneath the truck burst, sending a spray of liquid fire across the snow. Lila threw herself flat as Scout jumped between her and the flame. His fur singed the smell of burnt hair thick in the wind. Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ryan's shoulder, shaking him awake. The young officer coughed violently, eyes wide with panic, but Caleb's voice cut through it. "Move, you hear me? We're not dying in another damn fire." He pulled at Ryan's ropes until they tore, then shoved him toward the tailgate. The latch was frozen, jammed with ice and soot, but Caleb slammed his shoulder into it again and again, until the metal screamed and gave way. The door fell open and snow rushed in, steam hissing where it met heat. The two men tumbled into the drift, rolling as fire surged behind them. Lila crawled backward through the snow, sobbing, her prosthetic leg heavy as lead. Scout bounded to her side, whining, nudging her back toward the hill. The explosion came a second later. The entire truck lifted off the ground for an instant before collapsing in a burst of flame, and the sound cracked through the valley like thunder. Burning fragments rained down, sizzling in the snow. The shock wave rolled through Lila's chest, stealing her breath, but she forced herself up again. Her eyes found Caleb through the haze. He was alive, but struggling to move, dragging Ryan by the arm. His face was black with soot, his coat torn and smoldering. She staggered forward, half crawling, half stumbling, until she reached him. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped, coughing hard. She shook her head fiercely. "You told me not to leave people behind." He stared at her, a ghost of a smile flickering through his exhaustion. Then his expression hardened. "We can't stay here." The forest loomed behind them, dark and waiting. Caleb threw Ryan's arm over his shoulder and began hauling him toward the tree line, each step a battle against pain and gravity. Scouts circled them protectively, barking into the storm, as if warning unseen enemies away. Lila followed close, limping and panting, the firelight fading behind them. As they reached the shelter of the trees, the world became quieter, muffled again by snow. Caleb eased Ryan down against a fallen trunk and collapsed beside him, his chest heaving. "What happened?" Lila asked, voice trembling. Caleb's eyes darted to the smoke rising through the storm. "Ambush," he said. "We were on patrol near the old logging road. Someone called for backup, a distress signal. When we got there, it was a trap. They jumped us. I think—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "They wanted me." Ryan groaned beside him, blood seeping through his sleeve. "Not think no. They said your name." He coughed again, spitting red onto the snow. "Said the war hero finally gets what he deserves." Caleb's gaze went distant, a haunted shadow crossing his face. "Voss," he muttered. "It has to be him." Lila frowned. "Who's Voss?" "A man who used to wear the same uniform I did," Caleb said darkly. "Only difference is he stopped fighting the enemy and started selling to them." Ryan nodded weakly. "He's been building something out here using old military gear. Someone higher up's covering for him. The sheriff didn't believe me when I said it." Lila clenched her hands. "He hurt you both because of me." Caleb looked at her sharply. "No baby girl, don't you carry that." His tone softened, but his eyes stayed fierce. "He hurt us because men like him don't think people like me are supposed to stand for something. They wanted to erase that. They wanted to make sure I stopped being a reminder." His words hit her harder than the cold ever could. For the first time, she noticed how his skin, dark and ashen under soot, glistened with sweat and frost. He had fought so long and so quietly that even his battles had become invisible. She knelt beside him, wiping the soot from his cheek with her mitten. "You can't disappear," she whispered. "Not again." Caleb exhaled shakily, gripping her hand. "Then I won't." He turned toward Ryan. "You still with me?" The officer nodded faintly, long enough to see this bastard pay. Caleb helped him sit up, using a torn piece of cloth to bandage the wound. "We move once the fire dies down," he said. "They'll come looking to confirm the kill. We'll head north toward the ridge. There's a ranger cabin there. Supplies, maybe a radio." Lila's eyes darted to the fire below. "What if they find us?" Caleb met her gaze. "Then we fight smart." He pointed to Scout, who was watching the forest edge with ears raised. "He'll warn us first." "Won't you, soldier?" Scout wagged his tail, once solemn, as if understanding. Behind them, Lila Turner limped through the uneven snow, her crutches sinking deep with every step, while Scout trotted close, nose low, tail flicking nervously. The dog stopped often, glancing back down the hill, growling softly, as if the forest itself carried enemies in its shadows. Caleb knew he was right to be afraid. Men like Voss didn't leave witnesses, and the trap that had nearly killed them wouldn't be the last. They needed distance and cover, and above all, warmth. Ryan stumbled beside him, muttering through clenched teeth. Why would he come after you out here?" Caleb didn't answer at first. He could hear the accusation buried inside the question. He thought of Voss's smirk years ago, when the truth about the weapons trafficking had come out, how Voss had walked away while the black soldier who refused to keep quiet nearly lost everything. "Because some men can't stand to see another man crawl out of the pit they dug for him," Caleb said, finally his voice low and rough. "He built his empire out of lies. I built mine out of silence. That's the difference." Ryan looked at him with a mixture of respect and regret, realizing too late the depth of what he had stepped into. They walked until the sound of fire was only a memory, and the only noise left was the wind whistling through frozen branches. Lila struggled to keep up her small frame, shivering, the prosthetic leg dragging. Caleb stopped and turned, reaching out. "Come here, little brave." She hesitated only a second before stepping toward him. He lifted her easily, setting her on his hip, ignoring the sting in his side. She tucked her face into his shoulder, and for the first time since the chaos began, she felt safe. "You smell like smoke," she whispered. "That means I'm still here," he murmured. Scout barked once ahead, breaking the brief peace. His paws scraped at the snow near a fallen tree, and Caleb followed his lead. Beneath the thick trunk was a narrow hollow, barely large enough for the four of them, but it would block the wind. "We rest here," Caleb said. Ryan collapsed first, sitting against the tree, pressing a hand to his ribs where bruises were already forming. Lila curled beside Scout, wrapping her arms around his neck for warmth. Caleb stayed standing, scanning the dark line of trees, every sound amplifying his pulse. He had learned long ago that danger didn't shout, it whispered. He watched the snow settle until his eyes blurred, and then he sank to one knee. The world spun his body, giving into exhaustion. Ryan looked over, alarmed. "You're bleeding," he said. Caleb glanced down, barely surprised to see the dark stains spreading beneath his coat. "Just the fire biting back," he muttered. Lila crawled over, panic in her voice. "You need help." He smiled faintly. "You already helped, baby girl. You brought me back." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm not losing you too." Caleb met her gaze, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "You won't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges burned. "I was keeping this for later," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a photo, faded and creased, showing a younger Caleb with another soldier. "That's Marcus," he said quietly, "the man whose tag you wear." Lila traced the image with her finger. "He looks kind." Caleb nodded slowly. "He was. He saved my life when he didn't have to. Said a soldier doesn't fight for orders. He fights for the person next to him. I never forgot that." He exhaled deeply, the memory, a small warmth in the cold. "When I pulled you out of that wreck 3 years ago, I finally understood what he meant." Lila's throat tightened. She pressed the photo to her chest. "Then I'll fight for you now." Caleb smiled tiredly. "Guess I taught you too well." The wind outside rose again, carrying with it the faint echo of voices, men shouting somewhere in the distance. Caleb stiffened, every muscle tightening. Ryan reached for the pistol strapped to his hip, its barrel bent slightly from the explosion. "They're tracking us," Ryan whispered. Caleb listened carefully, eyes narrowing. The sounds faded as quickly as they'd come. Maybe the storm had carried them from miles away, or maybe the enemy was already closer than they thought. Either way, Caleb said, we move before dawn. He leaned back against the trunk, closing his eyes for just a second, but sleep didn't come. Instead came memories, Kandahar burning streets, the smell of diesel and blood. Voss's voice echoing through the radio. "We leave no evidence," Marcus's screamed, though. Then the silence afterward, the one Caleb had never been able to escape. He opened his eyes again and found Lila watching him. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I think about everyone I couldn't save." "Then think about who you did," she whispered and pointed to herself. The simplicity of it broke something open inside him. He looked away, blinking hard, but she reached up and touched his cheek. "You told me once pain means we're alive. That means you still are." Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. Scout shifted, whining softly, and Lila rested her hand on his head. "We'll make it," she said, her voice steady now. "All of us." The conviction in her tone pulled Caleb back from the edge of his memories. He glanced at Ryan, who was dozing but breathing steadily, and nodded to himself. "Yeah," he whispered, "we will." As dawn crept faintly through the trees, turning the snow to dull silver, Caleb pushed himself to his feet. His body protested, but his will refused to break. "Time to move," he said. Ryan groaned but rose, tightening his jacket. Lila climbed to her feet with Scout's help. The storm had calmed, but the cold was sharper, the air thin and cutting. Caleb led them deeper into the woods, tracing a faint trail north. Each step took them further from the wreck, but closer to something else, an invisible line between survival and purpose. Lila followed without complaint, her eyes on the dog tag bouncing against her chest. Scout moved ahead occasionally, stopping to sniff his instincts, guiding them towards safety. As they climbed a low ridge, the forest opened briefly to reveal the valley below. Smoke still rose faintly from the charred remains of the truck. Behind him, Ryan Cole followed with stiff movements, one hand clutching his bruised ribs, the other gripping his rifle bent, but still serviceable. Lila Turner came next, balancing on her crutches, each step deliberate and brave, her small body wrapped in Caleb's oversized coat. Scout padded ahead, ears twitching his nose, brushing the snow as if the world itself were a map only he could read. They were a fractured procession bound not by blood, but by survival. The trees grew thicker as they climbed the slope, black trunks cutting through the white, like sentinels guarding secrets. Caleb led them through a narrow pass, glancing behind, often his soldier's instincts refusing to rest. Every sound mattered. The groan of a tree under ice, the snap of a branch far off the hush of snow shifting under unseen weight. Somewhere men were still looking for them. He could feel it in his bones the same way he once felt enemy eyes watching through desert heat. "You think they'll keep tracking us?" Ryan asked between breaths. Caleb didn't look back. Voss doesn't like loose ends. He'll send men until he's sure I'm gone. "And what about me?" Ryan's tone carried more bitterness than fear. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're a witness. That makes you the next body he needs buried." Lila stumbled, then her prosthetic leg catching on a hidden root. Caleb turned quickly, catching her before she fell. "Easy now," he murmured. Her small hand gripped his sleeve, her breath fogging against his chest. "I'm fine," she whispered. He looked at her for a moment longer than needed, then nodded. "You're tougher than half the soldiers I knew." She gave a faint smile. "You taught me." Scout barked once, sharp and low. Caleb froze, raising a hand for silence. Ahead, the path narrowed into a ravine, the kind hunters used to trap game. He knelt, brushing away a layer of snow. A wire gleamed faintly beneath. "Snares," he muttered. "They've been here." Ryan crouched beside him, his expression darkening. This wasn't set by amateurs. That's military-grade wire. Caleb's stomach sank. "Then he's closer than I thought." They skirted the trap, carefully moving along the ridge instead of through the hollow. Scout stayed at the front, occasionally stopping to sniff and growl. The forest seemed to breathe with them, each rustle of wind another reminder that life and death walk side by side here. Hours passed in tense silence. When they finally stopped to rest, Leela sank onto a fallen log, panting. Caleb crouched in front of her, adjusting the straps of her prosthetic. "Hurts?" he asked. "Only a little," she said. "But I can keep going. You shouldn't have to," Ryan said from behind, his voice softer than before. "You're just a kid." She looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and steady. "I'm not just anything. I'm someone Mr. Caleb saved, and that means I don't quit when it's hard." Ryan glanced at Caleb, who said nothing but gave a faint nod of approval. Scout lay beside Lila, resting his head on her knee, eyes half closed but ears alert. For a fleeting moment it almost felt peaceful, but peace in a place like this never lasted. The first gunshot came from the east, a sharp crack that sent birds bursting from the trees. Caleb threw himself over Lila, instinctively snow spraying around them. Ryan rolled behind a tree rifle raised. "How far?" he hissed. "Too close," Caleb said. He peered through the trees and saw the faint glint of movement figures, advancing in formation, careful trained. "Move now," he ordered. Lila grabbed her crutches, heart pounding. Scout barked furiously, running ahead. Bullets tore through branches, splintering bark. The three of them moved uphill, weaving between trees, breath and snow mixing in frantic clouds. Caleb fired, once aiming low to slow pursuit. The return fire was precise, professional. These weren't local hunters. They were soldiers. He's sending his best. Caleb muttered more to himself than anyone. They reached a ridge where the land dropped sharply into a ravine. "Down," Caleb said. "We slide." Lila hesitated, staring at the steep slope. "I'll fall." "I've got you," he said, gripping her arm. Together they plunged down, snow exploding around them, Scout bounding ahead. Ryan followed, cursing under his breath. They landed hard at the bottom, gasping. The gunfire above faded for a moment, replaced by the wind's moan. Caleb dragged himself upright, pulling Lila close. "We move west," he said. "There's a stream nearby. The water will hide our tracks." They followed the faint sound of rushing water, their footprints swallowed by fresh snow. The stream was half frozen, a thin ribbon of silver winding through the forest. Caleb knelt, dipping his hand in the icy flow, wincing as the cold bit deep. "This leads to the ranger cabin," he said, "about 2 miles downstream." Lila crouched beside him, her face pale. "How do you know all this?" Caleb stared at the water memories flickering like ghosts. "I used to run training drills here years ago, before I realized what kind of man Voss was becoming." Ryan sighed. "He trained us all, didn't he? We just didn't see it soon enough. He taught us how to survive," Caleb said quietly. "But he forgot to teach himself how to live." The words hung in the cold air, heavy and final. They followed the stream in silence, the water whispering beside them. The forest began to thin as they reached the foothills, and faint outlines of an old wooden structure appeared through the snow. A cabin slanted and weathered, its roof sagging under years of neglect. Scout barked once and ran ahead, tail wagging weakly. Relief washed through Lila's chest. "We made it," she whispered. Caleb's eyes stayed sharp. "We'll see." He pushed open the door, the hinges shrieking in protest. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint scent of old smoke. Broken furniture lay scattered, and a rusted lantern sat on the table. Ryan shut the door behind them, leaning his rifle against the wall. "We'll need a fire." Caleb nodded, scanning the corners. But no smoke. "We're still being hunted." Lila sank onto a cot, clutching Scout, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Caleb crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did good, little brave," he whispered. "You did real good." She smiled faintly before her eyes closed. Ryan rummaged through shelves until he found a small first aid kit, half empty but still usable. He tossed it to Caleb. "We'll rest here, but not for long," he said. The warmth was faint, but it was enough to keep Lila Turner from shivering. She sat curled beside Scout, the German shepherd's head resting in her lap, his slow breathing syncing with hers. Across the room, Ryan Cole sat against the far wall, eyes half closed, his arm wrapped in a torn bandage that was already soaked with blood. Caleb crouched near the door, checking the latch again, his silhouette rigid against the dim light. The quiet between them wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are too tired to speak and too afraid to admit it. Caleb's body ached, his shoulder stiff from the fall, his ribs bruised, but pain had long become a familiar companion. He looked at the sleeping girl and felt something twist deep in his chest, a mix of pride, guilt, and disbelief that she was still alive because of him. The world outside had burned and frozen in the same breath, yet somehow she remained small and unyielding, like a flame that refused to die. He glanced at Ryan. "How's the arm?" Ryan grunted. "Hurts like hell, but I'll live." "That's the spirit," Caleb muttered, tossing a strip of fabric into the fire. "You sound like you've said that a lot." Ryan gave a weak smile. "Guess you've said it more." "Yeah," Caleb said, his eyes distant. "Too many times." He moved closer to the fire, holding his hands over it. His dark skin reflected the faint orange glow, highlighting the deep scars that ran across his palms and forearms, remnants of another explosion years ago, one that had taken lives he couldn't forget. "She's tougher than she looks," Ryan said, quietly nodding toward Lila. "Most kids would have frozen or panicked out there." Caleb's voice softened. "She's been through worse. The first time I saw her, she was half buried in snow beside a wrecked car. Her mother didn't make it. I carried her 3 miles to town. No one else even stopped." Ryan looked down. "And you kept her?" "Didn't plan to," Caleb admitted. "But she kept showing up. Little by little, she made me remember what it felt like to matter." He let out a humorless laugh. Didn't know that was something I'd forgotten. Ryan nodded, watching him. War takes that from people. Makes you think you're just a weapon, not a person. War didn't take it, Caleb said. People did. The ones who come home and act like men like me shouldn't. He paused, the bitterness sliding into his voice like a slow leak. You know what they said when I came back from Kandahar? They said, "You're lucky you got out." Lucky. As if survival's a blessing when all it means is you get to remember everything. He fell silent, his gaze fixed on the flame. The fire popped, sending a spark toward the ceiling. Lila stirred and blinked sleepily. "Mr. Caleb." He turned instantly, his expression softening. "I'm here, little brave. I dreamed about the ocean," she murmured. "It was warm there." Caleb smiled faintly. "Then hold on to that dream. The world will try to take it, but don't let it." She rubbed her eyes. "Will the bad men find us?" "Not tonight," he said. "Scouts on watch." The dog's ears flicked, as if confirming the promise. Lila sat up a little, looking at the window, where the wind pressed against the glass like a living thing. "You look sad," he said quietly. Caleb tilted his head. "Do I?" "You do when you think I'm not looking." Her words pierced through the armor he wore around his heart. He tried to answer, but couldn't. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal emblem, bent and worn a medal from his service days. "You know what this is?" She shook her head. "They gave it to me for bravery, but the truth is, I wasn't brave. Marcus was. He took the blast so I could walk away. They gave me his medal because they needed someone alive to pin it to." Lila frowned, her small hands clutching Scout's fur. "That's not fair," "No," Caleb said. "It's not. But sometimes the world doesn't need fair. It just needs people who don't give up trying." Lila's gaze softened. "Then maybe Marcus didn't die for nothing, because now you save people too." He looked at her, stunned by the simplicity of her logic. "Maybe," he whispered. She leaned closer. "And maybe you can teach me how to be brave like him." Caleb smiled, the first real one in days. "You already are, little brave. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about walking anyway." She nodded solemnly and leaned her head against Scout's shoulder again. The room fell quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Caleb turned to Ryan, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "You think she's wrong?" Caleb asked. Ryan shook his head. "No. I think she sees something in you the rest of us forgot existed." Caleb didn't reply. He looked out the window again, the night swallowing the world beyond. For a long time, neither man spoke. The weight of memory hung thick in the air, pressing down like the snow on the roof. After a while, Caleb rose and opened the door, just a crack. The wind slapped his face, cold and sharp, but it carried with it the sound he had been waiting for, the steady hum of distant engines. His pulse quickened. "They're still out there," he whispered. Ryan stood wincing as he reached for his weapon. How close, too close. Caleb shut the door and turned to the girl. "Lila, wake up." She blinked, startled, as Scout sprang to his feet, growling low. "We have to move again," now she asked, still groggy. "Now," Caleb said. He kicked snow over the fire, extinguishing it. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the pale silver leaking through the window. Ryan grabbed what supplies he could, half a loaf of bread, a canteen, and a flare gun missing its cartridges. Caleb knelt beside Lila, helping her into her coat. "You said the ocean was warm," he murmured. "Keep that in your mind, all right? We'll find our own kind of warmth soon." She nodded bravely, holding Scout's collar. Caleb straightened his eyes hard again. Lila Turner trudged between them, her breath visible in short bursts, the metal of her prosthetic leg creaking faintly under the cold. Scout darted ahead and back again, never straying far, his dark shape slicing through the curtain of white. Behind them, the cabin disappeared beneath falling snow, erased as if it had never existed. The engines they had heard the night before had gone silent, but Caleb knew silence didn't mean safety. He had seen too many ambushes built from quiet. Every rustle in the trees made his pulse rise. The storm had eased, but the air still held that sharp, metallic taste that comes before something worse. They followed the frozen stream until it widened into a clearing where the trees bent inward, forming a kind of natural canopy. There, half buried under years of ice, stood another cabin smaller than the last, but intact. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, yet the chimney still stood blackened by old smoke. "We'll rest here," Caleb said. Ryan nodded without a word, his face pale. Lila didn't speak either, though her lips trembled with fatigue. Scout whined softly and nosed her leg as if reminding her to keep going. Caleb pushed open the door, the hinges shrieking like something waking from a long sleep. The air inside was cold and stale, filled with the faint smell of burnt oil. Dust coated everything: the walls, the table, the old stove, but there were signs of recent disturbance: boot prints in the dirt, an empty can on the floor, and a torn sleeve hanging from a nail. "Someone's been here," Ryan said under his breath. Caleb's eyes swept the room. "Not recently. The tracks are half filled with snow." He set down his pack and moved to check the windows, peering through cracks in the boards. The forest beyond seemed empty. Still, he didn't relax. "We'll make a small fire," he said. "No bigger than a candle. We can't draw attention." Ryan found dry bark and splinters, while Lila sat beside Scout, rubbing warmth into his paws. When the fire caught, it filled the room with a dull orange glow that flickered across their faces. For the first time in hours, Caleb felt something like calm, but it lasted only a moment. His gaze fell on the far corner where something glinted faintly in the light. He stood across the room and brushed aside the dust. A small metal box lay half buried beneath a torn tarp. The military insignia on the lid was unmistakable, a black hawk wing spread wide, Voss's old unit. Caleb froze, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He lifted the box carefully and opened it. Inside lay fragments of a communication device, burnt around the edges, but still recognizable, and a small silver drive, marked with the same symbol. Ryan came closer, his breath catching. "That's military tech," he said. "Encrypted field data." Caleb nodded slowly. "He's been using these hills as a relay point. This isn't random. He's tracking us." He turned the drive over in his hand. There was something etched into the metal numbers coordinates. He felt the old soldier in him awaken fully, the part that never really went to sleep. "He's building something out here," Caleb said. "A network. This is proof." Lila tilted her head, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means the men who tried to kill us aren't just soldiers. They're part of something bigger. And if this cabin was a drop site, then whoever left this behind might come back." Ryan frowned. "Then we shouldn't stay. We can't move yet," Caleb said. "You're bleeding through that bandage and she's half frozen." He looked down at Lila, who was trying to smile despite the fear in her eyes. "We'll rest just long enough to think." He pocketed the drive and sat beside her. The fire crackled weakly. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of snow sliding off the roof. Then Scout's ears twitched. He stood tail stiff, growling low in his throat. Caleb rose, instantly, hand on his weapon. "What is it?" Boy Scout moved to the door, nose pressed to the crack at the bottom. The sound came a second later. "A faint whirring mechanical growing louder," Drone Caleb said sharply. Ryan cursed under his breath, grabbing his rifle. Lila's eyes widened. "Like the one from before. Exactly like it," Caleb said. "Down, all of you." The buzzing intensified until a small shadow passed across the window, a black drone with blinking red lights scanning the clearing. Caleb waited until it drifted closer, hovering near the chimney. Then in one quick motion, he kicked open the door and fired. The bullet struck true. The drone jerked and spun, crashing into the snow outside. "Stay here," he barked and ran out. The cold cut him like glass, but he didn't care. He kicked through the drift until he found the wreckage smoke curling from the damaged core. Kneeling, he pried open the side panel. Inside, the camera lens was shattered, but a small transmitter still blinked faintly. He ripped it out and crushed it beneath his boot. The silence afterward was so complete it made his ears ring. He carried the drone back inside, tossing it onto the table. "They saw us," Ryan said grimly. "Not for long," Caleb replied. "But it means they know the area. They'll send men before sundown." He began tearing the drone apart piece by piece, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his chest. Beneath the circuits, he found something new, a folded note tucked beneath the wiring. He pulled it free, smoothing the paper. Scrawled across it were 5 words: "You're not the only survivor." For a second, no one spoke. Ryan leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Caleb's eyes narrowed. "It means Voss isn't the only ghost out here." His mind raced. If others had survived from their old unit, if someone else had left this warning, then they weren't just being hunted, they were being tested. "Someone's playing both sides," he muttered, maybe trying to expose him. Ryan shook his head. "Or maybe they're leading you right into his hands." Caleb stared at the note again, then folded it neatly and slipped it into his pocket beside the drive. "Either way, it changes nothing. We move before dark." Lila looked up at him. "You're not scared, are you?" Caleb crouched beside her, his gaze steady. "Fear's not the enemy. Giving into it is. You remember that." She nodded, pressing her hand against Scout's collar. He smiled faintly and stood. "Get what you can carry. We'll head toward the cliffs once the light fades. If they find this place, I want them to think we died here." Ryan glanced at the shattered drone. Ryan Cole followed close behind, his breath ragged but steady, while Lila Turner clung to Scout's collar as they climbed the narrow path toward the cliffs. The storm had broken, leaving the sky clear and full of stars, but the temperature had dropped so low that every exhale turned into a thin white cloud that froze and fell before it reached the ground. They had left the cabin hours ago, leaving behind the wrecked drone and its haunting message. Caleb's mind turned the words over and over. "You're not the only survivor." They didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a promise, one that carried both hope and danger. If someone else from his unit had survived Voss's betrayal, it meant there was still a chance to expose everything. But if Voss had planted the message, it meant the trap was already closing. Either way, Caleb knew one truth that never failed him when the past comes calling, it never calls alone. The group reached a ridge where the trees thinned out, revealing the valley below. In the faint moonlight, the snow-covered expanse looked serene, almost peaceful, belying the blood and fire that had scarred it hours before. Caleb stopped to catch his breath, leaning on a fallen trunk. Lila watched him closely, sensing his pain, even though he tried to hide it. "We can rest," she said softly. "You're tired." He smiled faintly. "Soldiers don't rest until they're safe, a little brave." "Then I guess I'm not a soldier," she said, "because I think we all need to breathe before we break." Ryan gave a small chuckle, the first sound of lightness they had heard all day. "The kid's got more sense than both of us." Caleb grunted, but sat down anyway, rubbing his shoulder. The cold crept into his bones, but exhaustion was the heavier enemy. As he stared at the horizon, his thoughts drifted to Voss Colonel Everett Voss, the man who had once commanded respect, the man whose voice had been law. Caleb remembered him in his old uniform, tall, silver-haired eyes like ice, his words sharp enough to cut through fear. He had been a mentor once, the kind Caleb had believed in, the kind who taught men to fight with conviction. But conviction, Caleb learned too late, could be twisted into something monstrous when it served greed. Voss had turned soldiers into tools, using their trust to build an empire of fear, selling weapons meant for defense to the highest bidder. When Caleb uncovered the truth, he had confronted him, and the result was bloodfire and exile. He was the reason Marcus died, Caleb murmured almost to himself. Ryan looked up. Voss Caleb nodded. "He sent us into that ambush. He said it was a reconnaissance mission. It was a test to see if his secret deals would hold up under pressure." Marcus saw the truth. He tried to warn the others. They silenced him before he could speak. His voice broke slightly on the last word, the memory raw even after years of distance. Lila reached out, placing her small hand over his. "He's still with you," she said simply. "That's why you keep fighting." Caleb swallowed hard. "Yeah, maybe that's why." Scout growled suddenly low and guttural. The hairs along his back stood straight. Caleb froze. "Down," he whispered. The group dropped low behind the trunk. The dog's nose twitched, pointing east. Through the silence, a faint rhythmic sound rose, the crunch of boots on snow, deliberate and measured. Caleb peered around the trunk and saw them, 3 figures moving in formation, their rifles slung low, their movements crisp and practiced. "They're sweeping the ridge," he murmured. "He found us faster than I thought." Ryan checked his rifle, the barrel gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "We can take them quietly," he whispered. Caleb shook his head. "Not with her here. We draw them away." Lila shook her head immediately. "No, I'm not leaving you again." "You're not leaving," Caleb said firmly. "You're surviving. That's different." He looked at Ryan. "You take her and Scout north to the ravine. There's an old trail that loops back toward the canyon. If I'm not there by dawn, you keep moving." "You can't take them on alone," Ryan hissed. "I've done worse." Caleb's voice was steady but low. "Besides, I'm not alone." He glanced at Lila, his expression softening. "I've got a reason to make it back." She opened her mouth to argue, but he placed a finger gently against her lips. "No more words. You're the bravest kid I know. Prove it now." Reluctantly, she nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Scout pressed against her side, whining softly. Caleb waited until they disappeared into the trees before turning back towards the ridge. The soldiers had stopped near a cluster of rocks, scanning the area. Caleb crouched low, moving in a half circle around them, using the snow's glare to mask his shadow. His boots sank without sound. He could hear their voices now, sharp-clipped, professional. One of them said, "Command said his trail went cold near the creek." Another replied, "Doesn't matter, he'll come to us. He always does." Caleb's jaw clenched, and he recognized that voice. He stepped closer until moonlight caught the speaker's face, young hard but familiar. Private Mason, the same recruit he had trained years ago. The realization hit him like a blow. He turned them all, Caleb thought bitterly. Loyalty had become currency, and Voss had bought them cheap. Caleb waited until they separated, then moved like a shadow, tackling the first soldier into the snow. The man gasped, but Caleb's hand covered his mouth before he could cry out. One swift strike, and the fight was over. The second turned, but Caleb was already on him, driving his shoulder into the man's ribs and twisting the rifle away. The third opened fire, the flash lighting the trees like lightning. Caleb dove behind a fallen log as bullets tore bark above his head. He waited for the pause between bursts, then rose and fired once. The man dropped silent. The woods fell quiet again, the echoes fading into the distance. Caleb stood still, breathing hard. 3 down, but more would come. He turned to strip the radio from the fallen soldier's vest and froze when he heard static. A voice broke through, smooth and commanding. "You've gotten slower, Sergeant Ross." The sound froze his blood. It was Voss. "You always did have a soft spot for the broken ones," the voice continued. "The girl, the dog, the boy in blue. You drag weakness behind you like a chain." Caleb stared at the radio, fury rising. "You still hiding behind your men?" "Colonel, you of all people should understand. Delegation," Voss replied. "But then again, you were always better at dying for others than leading them." Caleb clenched his jaw. "This ends soon." Voss chuckled, the sound low and cold. "Oh, it ends, Sergeant. But not for me." The signal cut out. Caleb knew it too well. It was the sound of a predator who still believed he owned the battlefield. He couldn't let that voice win again. Ahead, the faint line of smoke curling above the trees told him what he needed to know. Ryan and Lila had made it to the ravine. He forced his pace faster, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. Scout's paw prints led the way, sure and determined. When Caleb finally reached them, Ryan was crouched near a small fire they had built under the shelter of a fallen pine, while Lila sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide and red from exhaustion. Scout barked once when he saw Caleb bounding forward to meet him. Caleb knelt, running a trembling hand over the dog's fur. "You kept them safe," he whispered. The German shepherd wagged his tail weakly, pressing his head into Caleb's chest. Ryan looked up. "You made it," he said, relief flickering across his face. Caleb nodded, lowering himself beside the fire. They were patrols, 3 of them, Voss's men, and they're gone now. Ryan didn't ask how. He just handed Caleb a flask of water and said, "We can't stay here long. He's tracking every move we make." Caleb unscrewed the cap, took a long drink, and stared into the flames. "I spoke to him," he said quietly. Ryan froze. "Voss. He was on the radio. He knows we're alive. He knows where we're going, and he knows what he did to Marcus." Lila glanced up, her small voice trembling. "Is he coming here?" "No," Caleb said. "Not yet. He wants me to come to him." Ryan frowned. "And you're going to?" Caleb's eyes lifted, calm but resolved. "If I don't, he'll keep sending men until one of you ends up in a grave. I'm not giving him that chance." "That's suicide," Ryan snapped. "He's got an army." So did every tyrant who thought fear made him untouchable. Caleb looked up, his expression hardening. "I've faced worse odds, not with a kid in tow," Ryan said. "She's not your soldier, Caleb." Caleb's voice softened. "No, she's the reason I'm still one." Lila clutched Scout tighter, her lower lip trembling. "You can't go alone." "I won't," Caleb said. "Not yet. But there's something I need to find first." He reached into his coat and pulled out the silver drive from the cabin, holding it between his fingers. "This holds proof of everything. Transactions, transport routes, the names of every man he sold out. If I can get it to the authorities in Helena, he's done." Ryan shook his head. "Helena's 100 miles south through terrain, crawling with his scouts. You'll never make it on foot." Caleb's gaze turned toward the horizon. "There's another way. Old mining roads under the ridge, they lead out to the highway. I used them back when we trained in these woods." "And you think they're still open?" Ryan asked. "We'll find out." Caleb turned to Lila. "You remember the medal I showed you?" She nodded, pulling it from her pocket. "It's my lucky thing now." "Good," he said. "You keep it close. But if I don't come back," she shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that. If I don't," he continued gently, "you find Captain Sarah Lorne at the Helena outpost. Tell her Caleb Ross kept his promise. She'll know what that means." The words hit Ryan hard. "You're talking like you've already decided." Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a folded photograph, faded creased, showing 5 soldiers in desert uniforms, smiling in front of a wrecked Humvee. Marcus stood beside him, arms slung over his shoulder. "He died trying to stop Voss," Caleb said quietly. "If I walk away now, I'm letting him die twice." Ryan's voice lowered. "And what about her? You'll let her lose you too." Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at Lila. "She won't lose me. She'll just carry me forward, same as I carried Marcus." For a long moment, the only sound was the whisper of the wind through the trees. Then Ryan exhaled sharply. "If you're going, I'm going too." Caleb looked up. "You're hurt." "I'm not dead," Ryan said. "And you're not walking into that hell alone. Someone's got to make sure you don't do something stupidly heroic." Caleb's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Fine, but we leave her here with Scout." Lila's eyes widened. "No, it's not a choice," Caleb said. "You're the heart of this Lila. Hearts don't belong on battlefields. But what if you don't come back? Then Scout will bring you home." Her tears fell freely now, freezing against her cheeks. "You can't promise that." Caleb hesitated, then reached out, pulling her close. "No, but I can promise I'll try." She buried her face against his chest. "I'm scared." "Good," he said softly. "Means you understand what's at stake." When she finally released him, she nodded weakly, her courage trembling but unbroken. Caleb rose, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. We moved before sunrise. The hours that followed were a blur of quiet motion. They found the old mining road exactly where Caleb remembered it, buried beneath snow and brush, but still intact. The wooden beams overhead groaned under their weight as they entered lantern light flickering against stone walls. The air inside was damp and cold, echoing with the distant drip of water. "Feels like walking into a grave," Ryan muttered. "If it gets us through, I don't care what it feels like," Caleb replied. They walked for what felt like miles, the tunnel winding deeper into the earth. Along the walls, old mining signs hung crooked warnings faded by time. Then Caleb saw something that made him stop short, a symbol etched into the stone, the same Black Hawk insignia from the metal box. Freshly carved. "He's been here," Caleb whispered. The sound of boots behind them confirmed it. Ryan swung around, rifle raised, just as a voice echoed through the tunnel, calm, cold, unmistakable. "You always did like chasing ghosts, Sergeant." Caleb froze, recognizing the voice immediately. Voss stepped from the shadows, flanked by two armed men, his silver hair gleaming in the lantern light. His uniform was gone, replaced by a dark coat, but his bearing was unchanged. Still the colonel, still in control. "You made this easy," Voss said. "I expected to have to drag you out of the woods." Caleb stepped forward. "I'm not running anymore," No Voss said. "You're limping toward your grave." Ryan fired first, the shot echoing like thunder. One of Voss's men fell. The second returned fire, and chaos erupted. The tunnel became a storm of muzzle flashes and flying debris. Caleb dove behind a support beam, returning fire. Ryan yelled, clutching his shoulder blade, spraying against the wall. Voss moved like a man untouched by chaos, stepping closer, his pistol raised. "I told you once, Ross," he said, his voice calm over the noise. "Heroes die young because they mistake sacrifice for purpose." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And cowards live long because they mistake cruelty for power." He fired again, the shot grazing Voss's arm. The colonel staggered but didn't fall. "You should have stayed buried," Voss hissed. "You should have stayed human," Caleb shot back. They circled each other, the tunnel shaking under the sound of gunfire and collapsing stone. Then Scout's bark echoed faintly from the entrance, followed by Lila's voice shouting his name. Caleb's heart lurched. She had followed. The distraction was enough. Voss lunged forward, striking Caleb's weapon aside and knocking him to the ground. His boot pressed against Caleb's chest. "This ends now," he said, raising the pistol. Before he could fire, Ryan, bleeding pale and furious, slammed into him from behind, dragging him down. The gun went off the shot, deafening in the enclosed space. When the dust cleared, Voss lay still, his weapon clattering from his hand. Caleb crawled forward, chest heaving, and picked up the gun. Ryan slumped beside him, clutching his wound. "You said you'd do something stupidly heroic," he gasped. Caleb looked down at the fallen colonel. "Guess I learned from the best." Outside, faint light seeped through the tunnel mouth, the first hint of dawn breaking through the storm. Colonel Everett Voss lay deep inside the passage. His voice finally silenced, his empire of fear reduced to a memory and a body cooling in the dark. The rifle in Caleb's hands felt heavier than before, not from weight, but from meaning. He dropped it slowly, letting it sink into the snow at his feet, and for the first time in years, his hands were empty. Ryan Cole leaned against the tunnel wall, his face pale, the wound in his shoulder still bleeding through the bandage. His breathing came in sharp, uneven pulls, but his eyes remained steady focused on the world beyond. "He's dead, isn't he?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "He's gone. You sure I made sure?" Ryan let out a weak, humorless laugh. "Good. Now maybe we can start living again." Lila Turner stood a few feet away, Scout pressed against her leg, and both of them trembling, but alive. Her small hands were clenched around the silver medal that hung from her neck, the one Caleb had given her long ago. She looked up at him, tears frozen to her cheeks. "You came back," she whispered. Caleb crouched in front of her, his dark eyes soft. "I told you I would." She touched the cut on his brow, the blood still wet. "You're hurt," he shook his head. "Nothing that matters." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the soldier and the child, two survivors bound not by fate, but by choice. Ryan watched them, his expression shifting between exhaustion and quiet awe. "You know," he said hoarsely, "if anyone told me a week ago that I'd see a man walk through hell for a little girl and a dog, I'd have laughed." Caleb looked back at him. "You still can." Ryan smiled weakly. "I'm too tired to laugh." The three of them stood together as the light crept higher, painting the snow in hues of amber and rose. Around them, the world looked untouched, as if all the violence that had consumed the night had been swallowed by the dawn. Caleb turned toward the east, where the faint outline of the road could be seen winding through the valley. "We need to get to Helena," he said. "There's proof in that drive, and it belongs in the right hands." Ryan frowned. "You sure you still trust the system?" "The same one that buried us? I don't trust systems," Caleb said. "I trust people who haven't forgotten how to fight for what's right." He glanced down at Lila. "And I trust her to remind me why it matters." Lila smiled faintly. "Then we go together." Caleb's throat tightened. "Together." He helped Ryan to his feet, looping the man's arm over his shoulder, and together they began the slow trek down from the ridge. Scout led the way, his paws leaving neat tracks in the snow. The mountains seemed quieter now, almost reverent, as if nature itself had been holding its breath for this moment. For hours they walked, the cold numbing their bodies, but sharpening their senses. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of the life the war had stolen. When they finally reached the valley floor, the sun was high, and the ruins of Voss's last outpost came into view, a cluster of burned tents and shattered vehicles scattered across the clearing. Caleb stopped staring at the wreckage. "He built his world on other people's pain," he said softly. "And it still fell apart faster than he ever imagined." Ryan spat blood into the snow. "That's the thing about evil. It's good at surviving, bad at lasting." Lila tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "Look." She pointed toward a figure slumped near one of the vehicles. Caleb's hand went to his holster out of habit, but when they reached the body, he realized it was one of Voss's men, barely 20 eyes open, but lifeless, a photo clutched in his frozen hand. Caleb bent to pick it up. It showed a young woman holding a baby, smiling. He let out a breath that fogged the air. "He had a family," he murmured. "They always do," Ryan said. "Doesn't make the choices better." No, Caleb agreed, but it makes the loss heavier. He tucked the photo back into the man's jacket, then stood. "Let's go before the storm comes again." They kept walking until they reached the forest edge, where the road began to show patches of asphalt through the ice. Lila's pace slowed her prosthetic leg, clicking softly against the frozen ground. Caleb lifted her into his arms without a word. She rested her head against his shoulder, whispering, "Are we really safe now?" Caleb hesitated. "Not yet, but safer than yesterday." She nodded, closing her eyes, her small fingers gripping his coat. Ryan limped beside them, his breath visible, his face drawn, but resolute. "You know he said you could have killed him cleaner. You had the shot." "I didn't want clean," Caleb replied. "I wanted him to see what he made of us. Broken men who still stood." "He saw it," Ryan said quietly, "and I think it scared him." Caleb didn't answer. His mind drifted back to Voss's last words, the bitterness still lingering in his ears. Heroes die young because they mistake sacrifice for purpose. He had always believed that was true. Until now. He looked at Lila asleep against him and realized he finally understood what purpose really meant. Not dying for something, living for someone. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of a small logging town. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant bark of dogs echoed through the crisp air. Scout pricked his ears and wagged his tail. Caleb stopped at the first house. They saw a modest cabin with a flag half buried in snow. He knocked once. An older woman answered, her gray hair tucked beneath a wool cap. Her eyes widened when she saw them. 3 strangers battered by the wilderness, a child in the arms of a soldier, and a dog with scars older than its years. "Please," Caleb said simply, "we need help." The woman's gaze softened. "Come in before you freeze." She led them inside, where a fire burned bright and the smell of soup filled the air. Caleb lowered Lila onto a couch, and she immediately curled into the warmth, Scout lying protectively at her feet. Ryan sank into a chair, groaning. The woman handed him a towel and then turned to Caleb. "You look like you've been through war." He gave a faint smile. "Something like that." She looked at him more closely, eyes narrowing. "I've seen your face before. You're Caleb Ross, aren't you? The one who exposed the Blackridge scandal." He blinked. "That was years ago. People remember those who do what's right," she said softly. "Stay as long as you need. The world could use more men like you." Her words hit him harder than any bullet. He nodded quietly, whispering maybe the world already has enough. It just forgets how to see them. Later, when the house was quiet and the others slept, Caleb stepped outside. The night sky stretched wide, the stars reflected in the frost. He pulled the silver medal from his pocket, running his thumb over its surface. Ryan Cole healed slower, but steadier, his wound leaving a scar that he wore with quiet acceptance. Lila Turner recovered fastest, her laughter now filling corners that had once echoed with silence. Scout followed her everywhere, his tail wagging through every doorway, his paws clicking against the wooden floor like a heartbeat that refused to fade. The town embraced them quietly. No one asked too many questions. Maybe they understood that some stories were written in scars rather than words. Every evening, Caleb sat by the window watching the sky fade from gold to gray, his reflection layered over the glass like the ghost of a man who had finally stopped running. He often caught himself tracing the edge of the medal around his neck, the same one he'd once handed to Lila when courage felt far away. Now she wore her own, a small makeshift pendant carved from Scout's broken tag. "For bravery," she'd said proudly, echoing his old words. "For family," he had corrected her softly. On the fifth night, the silence outside broke with the distant rumble of engines. Ryan was the first to step out, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. But what appeared wasn't an army. It was a convoy of official vehicles bearing the insignia of Montana Search and Rescue. Captain Sarah Lorne stepped out first, her tall figure cutting clean lines against the snow. Her eyes found Caleb immediately, a faint smile playing across her lips. "You've been busy, Sergeant," she said, voice steady as the cold. "Word reached Helena 2 days ago. The data drive you carried, it's already dismantling the last of Voss's network. The world will finally know what he built and who stopped him." Caleb looked down at the snow beneath his boots. "He's gone," he said quietly, "but what he made will take years to undo." Sarah nodded. "And people like you will make sure those years count." Ryan limped forward, shaking her hand. "Guess we finally picked the right side of history." She smirked. "You always had it in you, just needed a reminder." Caleb turned toward Lila, who stood beside Scout, her eyes bright but wary. "Looks like we're free," she said. He knelt in front of her, the weight of the last few days pressing on his shoulders like the mountain's own memory. "Freedom's not just walking away, little brave," he said. "It's knowing what to carry with you and what to leave behind." She tilted her head. "What will you leave behind?" "The war," he said after a pause. "The guilt, the ghosts. And what will you keep?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You." The convoy took them to Helena 2 days later. Reporters gathered like crows around the courthouse steps when Caleb testified, but he ignored the noise, speaking only the truth names, dates, crimes, and the men who had traded lives for profit. The files Ryan helped decrypt painted a picture so wide and damning that even the federal agents listened in silence. When it ended, there was no applause, no celebration, only the quiet satisfaction that justice, however late, had finally arrived. Outside, snow began to fall again, flakes drifting softly through the air. Lila stood at the bottom of the steps, Scout beside her waiting. Caleb descended slowly, every step lighter than the last. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now," he said. But peace isn't something you find once. It's something you keep choosing. She smiled. Then we'll keep choosing. They spent the next weeks in Helena adjusting to normal life, a concept that felt foreign after so much survival. Ryan joined the rescue unit under Sarah's command, determined to use his training for something better. Lila enrolled in the local school, though she still limped from the long trek through the mountains. On her first day, Caleb walked her to the gate, bending low to adjust the strap on her prosthetic. "You'll do fine," he said. "I'm scared," she whispered. "That's how you know it matters." She nodded, hugging him tightly before running off toward the other children. Scout barked from the truck, tail wagging as if proud. Watching her disappear into the crowd, Caleb realized something that struck deep and simple. The girl who had once been saved in the snow had learned how to walk on her own. He turned back toward the open road. For the first time in his life, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like an invitation. That evening, he visited Marcus's grave at the small military cemetery on the hill. Snow covered the headstones in a perfect white sheet. Caleb brushed it away from the name carved into the stone, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hill. He stood there for a long time, the cold biting through his gloves, and whispered, "We made it out. I didn't do it clean and I didn't do it alone, but we made it." He pulled the medal from around his neck and placed it on the grave. "You told me once that surviving isn't the same as living. You were right. I think I finally understand." Behind him, footsteps crunched softly in the snow. Sarah approached holding 2 cups of coffee. "Didn't think you'd leave without saying goodbye," she said. "Wouldn't feel right," he replied. She handed him a cup, steam curling between them. "You're not done, are you?" "No," he said. "But I'm starting over. There's a difference." She smiled faintly. "There always is." When she left, Caleb remained there a moment longer, then turned back toward town. The sun had dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. But in those shadows, light lingered reflected in the snow, the same way hope always finds a way to stay. Weeks later, when the snow finally began to melt, Lila brought home a school assignment. Write about the person who changed your life. She showed it to him shyly one night, sitting by the fire. Her handwriting was uneven, her words simple but true. "He wasn't my father, but he taught me what one should be. He didn't fix everything, but he showed me how to start again. And when I was lost, he never stopped coming for me." Caleb read it twice, his vision blurring near the end. He looked up to find her watching him. "You should have told me before you turned this in," he said softly. "Why?" "Because it's the kind of thing that makes a grown man cry." She giggled, curling against his side. "Then it means it's real." Scout barked once, as if agreeing. Caleb put an arm around her shoulders, his gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the last snow of the season fell gently against the glass. The world was quiet, no longer cruel, just vast and open. A canvas waiting for those brave enough to paint something new on it. He thought of Marcus, of Ryan, of Voss, and of every name carved into the memory of war. All of them part of the same storm that had nearly buried him, yet somehow led him here. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for peace, but for purpose, because peace fades, but purpose carries on. Lila stirred beside him. "What did you say?" she asked sleepily. "Nothing, little brave," he murmured. "Just thanking the snow for remembering." She smiled, half dreaming. "Then maybe it'll never forget us. The end. In a world where even mercy can get you killed, one man walked back into the snow to face the ghost that ruined him and the child he swore he'd never lose again. Beneath the frozen ground waits a truth so cruel it once tore a family apart, yet somehow it's also the only thing that could put them back together. Don't look away when the storm begins. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because the ending will change how you see loyalty forever.